Chapter 28, Secret Order. Badump, badump, badump. Klein's heart began beating rapidly. It shrank into a clump before expanding abruptly. It made his body tremble gently. There was an instant when he nearly forgot what he had to do until the lurking figure suddenly paused. The figure pricked his ears slightly as though listening for any changes. Blood flowed back from his brain as Klein regained his basic cognitive abilities. He reached beneath the pillow for the wooden grip of the revolver. He felt the firm but smooth feeling as he rapidly calmed down. He silently and slowly pulled out the revolver and aimed it at the trespasser's head. To be honest, he had no confidence in striking the intruder. Although he was already able to stably hit the target during practice, a moving person and a fixed target were completely different. He was not arrogant enough to confound the two together. However, he vaguely remembered something from his previous life. The general idea was that a nuclear weapon wielded the greatest strength before its launch. The principle held in his current situation. The best deterrence was before he shot, by not pulling the trigger or shooting blindly. The intruder was unable to determine whether or not he was a complete rookie who had an extremely high chance of missing him. His worries and fears would make him deliberate more, resulting in him restraining himself. In an instant, another thought arose in him. It immediately made Klein turn decisive. He was not the kind of person who turned calmer when faced with danger. Instead, he had already imagined the situation when he faced the observer, using intimidation instead of attacking. The Foodaholic Empire had an idiom: where there is precaution, there will be no danger. When Klein pointed his gun at the intruder, the thin man froze suddenly, as though he had sensed something. Following that, he heard a voice that hid a chuckle. "Good evening, sir." The scrawny man clasped both his hands together, and his body seemed to tense. Klein sat on the lower bunk, aimed the person's head with the revolver, and tried to speak as leisurely and as naturally as he could. "Please raise both of your hands and turn around. Try to do it slow. To be frank, I am very timid and I get nervous easily. If you move too quickly, I can be frightened, and I can't guarantee that there won't be a situation where I misfire." "Yes, that's right." The scrawny man raised both of his hands and held them up near his head before turning his body bit by bit. The first thing that came into view was a black tight suit with neat buttons. Next, he caught a pair of brown eyebrows that were thick and sharp. The intruder's deep blue eyes didn't reflect fear, but rather gazed upon Klein with the intensity of a ferocious beast. It seemed that if Klein were careless for a second, the other person would leap forward and tear him to pieces. He clenched the handle tightly as he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent. It was only when the thin man faced him completely did Klein jerk his chin towards the door. He softly and gently said, "Sir, let's take this outside. Do not disturb the beautiful dreams of others. Oh, do keep your motions slow. Lighten your footsteps a little too. It's basic courtesy for a gentleman." The thin man's cold pupils rolled as he swept Klein a glance. He continued raising his hands as he walked slowly to the door. Under the revolver's aim, he twisted the handle and slowly opened the door. When the door was half opened, he suddenly lowered himself and rolled forward. The door was pulled by a strong wind, and it closed with a slam. Benson, who was on the top bunk, was stirred. He almost woke up in a daze. At that moment, a leisurely and serene melody entered from outside. The heavy and comfortable voice started to sing. "Oh, the thread of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies." 1. The poem seemed to possess the power to calm and relax others. Benson, who was on the top bunk, and Melissa, who was in another room, again fell asleep amid their grogginess. Klein's body and mind was also peaceful and quiet. He nearly yawned. The way the thin man had darted off was so agile that he could not react in time. Looking at the closed door, he smiled and muttered to himself. You might not believe it, but pulling the trigger would not release a round. The empty chamber to prevent misfiring. Following that, Klein listened to the midnight poem as he patiently awaited for the battle outside to end. Within a minute, the tranquil melody which resembled the reflection of moonlight on the surface of a lake stopped, and the dark night resumed its deep silence. Klein silently spun the cylinder and moved the empty chamber away as he awaited for the outcome. He uneasily waited for a full 10 minutes. Just as he wondered if he should investigate, He heard Dunn Smith's staid and warm voice from the door. It's settled. Phew. Klein exhaled. He held his revolver and took his key. Barefooted, he carefully approached the door before silently opening it to see the black trench coat and the half-top hat. Dunn Smith was standing there with his deep and calm gray eyes. He closed the door behind him and followed Dunn to the end of the corridor and stood amid the weak crimson moonlight. It took me some time to enter his dream, said Dunn calmly as he looked at the red moon outside the window. Do you know his background? Klein felt a lot more relieved. Dunn nodded and said, an ancient organization known as the Secret Order. They were established in the Fourth Epoch and are related to the Solomon Empire and a number of fallen aristocrats of that period. The Antigonus family's diary came from them. Due to a member's negligence, it entered the antique market and was obtained by Welch. They had no choice but to send people in search of it. Without waiting continuing. For Klein's question, he paused before. We will capture the remaining members they have according to the clues. Well, it might not end too well. These fellows are as good at hiding as the rats in the sewers. But at the very least, they would believe that we have likely obtained the Antigonus family's notebook or that we have obtained a critical clue. In that case, as long as it's not something extremely crucial or important, they would abandon the operation. That is their philosophy on surviving. What if the notebook is extremely crucial and important? Asked Klein worriedly. Dunn smiled without an answer. Instead, he said, we know very little of the Secret Order. Our success this time is all thanks to your sharp wits. This contribution is all yours. In light of the possibility of hidden dangers and how heightened perception would aid in finding the notebook, you have a chance at choosing. A chance at choosing? Klein vaguely guessed something as his breathing subconsciously turned heavy. Dunn wiped the smile from his face as he said in all seriousness, do you wish to become a Beyonder? You can only choose the starting sequence of an incomplete sequence. Of course, you can give up this chance and choose to accumulate the merit you have garnered. Then, all you have to do is wait till there's sufficient room for you to become a Sleepless, which is also the first complete sequence the goddess has bestowed on the Nighthawks. Indeed, Klein felt delighted and did not have any hesitant emotions. He took the initiative to ask, then from which of the sequence 9s can I choose from? I have to have detailed information to decide whether to give up or accept, as well as choose which one. Dunn turned around and seemed to be cloaked in the crimson veil that shone down on him. He looked into Klein's eyes and said slowly, apart from the Sleepless, the Church has 3 sequence 9 potion formulas. One of them is Mystery Prior, which is also the power old Neil controls. Roseanne has likely mentioned this to you. She can never hold her tongue. Klein smiled awkwardly, at a loss for an answer. Thankfully, Dunn did not mind it as he continued. Our Mystery Prior potion formula and the later sequences that aren't directly chained were obtained from the Moses ascetic order. Back then, it was said that they had yet to fall to corruption. They persisted in their morals and precepts, determined in their pursuit of knowledge. They kept their secrets strictly confidential. Anyone that entered the order would be barred from speaking for 5 years after becoming a Mystery Prior. They would learn to keep silent, so as to cultivate and enhance their focus. The maxim of the Moses ascetic order, do as you wish, but do no harm, began from them. Mystery Priors have a comprehensive but rudimentary understanding and grasp of magic, witchcraft, astrology, and other mystical knowledge. They also know a fair number of magical rituals, but they can easily sense certain existences that hide among matter. Therefore, they have to be careful and show respect to their powers as a Beyonder. We lack a large portion of this sequence, causing it to be an incomplete chain. For example, it's sequence 8. Of course, perhaps the Holy Cathedral has it. This pretty much meets all my requirements. Klein nodded slightly, to the point of having the urge to choose. Thankfully, he still remembered certain things. What about the other 2? The second type is named Corpse Collector. Quite a number of cultists who worship death in the southern continent choose it. After consuming the potion, unintelligent dead spirits would mistake them as one of their kind and not attack them. They would gain resistance to the cold, decay, and corrosiveness of cadaveric auras. They will be able to directly see a portion of evil spirits and see the characteristics and weaknesses of undead creatures, as well as gain certain attribute enhancements. We have the Sequence 8 and Sequence 7 that follows it. You probably can guess Sequence 7, Spirit medium. This was chosen by Daly back then, described done in detail. Spirit medium does appear mysterious and cool, but what I want most is to grasp knowledge of mysticism. Klein did not interject. All he did was listen quietly. Dunsmith looked sideways at the crimson moon and said, "We only have sequence 9 of the third type. Whether the Holy Cathedral has it, I'm not sure. It's called seer." Seer? Klein's pupils constricted as he recalled the regret emperor Roselle had left in his diary. He regretted not choosing apprentice, marauder, or seer. Chapter 29. Jobs and rentals are serious business. Klein tried his best to remain his usual self as he asked with genuine interest, "What abilities do seers have?" Your question is inaccurate. The question should be, what abilities does consuming the seer potion give? Dunsmith shook his head and chuckled. His gray pupils and face turned away from the moon as his features hid in the shadows. There are many kinds of things involved: astromancy, cartomancy, spiritual pendulums, and scrying. Of course, it does not mean that consuming the potion will immediately allow you to grasp all of them. The potion only equips you with the qualifications and ability to learn it, as they lack direct means of fighting enemies. You can probably imagine that setting up a magical ritual requires a lot of preparation. It's not suitable for combat. Therefore, in terms of knowledge of mysticism, a seer will be more learned and professional than a mystery prior. It sounds like it matches my requirements as well. However, the lack of means to directly deal with enemies is quite a dilemma. Furthermore, the Church of Evernight likely doesn't have the subsequent sequences. The Holy Cathedral likely refers to the headquarters, the Cathedral of Serenity. The means available to low-sequence beyonders against their enemies might not be comparable to firearms. Klein fell into deep thought as he racked his brains. He kept going back and forth between mystery, priors, and seers. He no longer considered corpse collector. Dunsmith smiled when he saw this. "You don't have to rush into a decision. Tell me your answer." Monday morning. Regardless of your choice of sequence or giving up this opportunity, none of us from the Nighthawks would have any other thoughts on the matter. Calm down and ask your heart. With that said, he took off his hat and bowed slightly. He slowly walked past Klein and headed for the stairwell. Klein did not say a word and did not immediately reply. He silently bowed and watched as Dunn left. Although he was constantly hoping to become a Beyonder previously, he was thrown into a dilemma when the opportunity arose. The subsequent missing sequences, Beyonders having the risk of losing control, the believability of Emperor Roselle's diaries, and the illusory murmurs that could corrupt people into madness all mixed together and formed a moat that obstructed his advancement. He took a deep breath and slowly breathed out. No matter how bad it is, it can't be worse than making an 18-year-old high school student decide on his future career. Klein gave a self-deprecating chuckle. Gathering his scattered thoughts, he opened the door softly and laid back on the bed. He laid there with his eyes open, silently looking at the bottom of the top bunk that was dyed with the faint crimson of the moon. A drunkard staggered outside the window as a carriage sped down the empty streets. These noises did not break the serenity of the night, but instead made it even darker and more distant. Klein's emotions settled down as he recalled his past on Earth. He recalled how he liked exercising, his father who always spoke loudly, his mother who enjoyed busying herself despite having a chronic disease, his friends who grew up with him, going from playing sports like soccer and basketball to games and mahjong, as well as the person he made a failed confession to. These were like a silent river. It did not have many ripples or deep sentimental feelings, but it silently drowned his heart. Perhaps one will only learn to cherish things after they have lost them. When the crimson receded and the sky turned golden yellow from the flaming ball's illumination, Klein had made his choice. He got out of bed and headed to the public bathroom to wash his face to wake himself up. Then, he took a one-solely note to Mrs. Winnie's to buy 8 pounds of rye bread with 9 pence, replenishing the staple food that had been consumed the previous night. "The price of bread has begun stabilizing," he commented after breakfast as Benson changed. It was Sunday, so both he and Melissa finally had the chance to rest. Klein, who was already in proper attire, was sitting on a chair and flipping through the outdated newspapers he brought back from yesterday. He said in surprise, "There's a house for rent here, North Burrows 3, Wendell Street, a bungalow with 2 floors. There are 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and 2 big balconies upstairs. Downstairs, there's a dining hall, a living room, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and 2 guest rooms, as well as an underground cellar. In front of the house are 2 acres of private land, and there's a small garden behind. It can be rented for 1, 2, or 3 years, with a weekly rent of £1.6 solely. Those interested can head to Champagne Street and look for Mr. Yusuf. That's our goal for the future. Benson wore his black top hat as he smiled to say, the rent for the places in newspapers is little too expensive. The Tianjin City Housing usually a improvement company has options that do not pale in comparison to that for cheaper. Why are we not searching in the Tianjin Housing Improvement Association for the Working Class? Melissa walked out from her room holding an old, veiled hat. She had changed into a grayish-white long dress that had been mended several times. She was silent and introverted, but that could not mask her youthfulness. Benson laughed. Where did you hear of the Tianjin Housing Improvement Association for the Working Class? Jenny? Mrs. Rochelle? Or is it from your good friend Selina? Melissa looked to the side and whispered a reply. Mrs. Rochelle. While washing up last night, I happened to meet her. She asked me about Klein's interview, and I told her roughly what happened. Then, she suggested I find the Tianjin Housing Improvement Association for the Working Class. Benson noticed Klein's puzzled expression and shook his head in amusement. They are targeted at the poor. Well, a precise description is that they are a housing association for the lower strata of society. They build and renovate houses that basically have communal bathrooms. They only provide 3 choices, a single, double, or triple bedroom. Do you wish to continue living in such an environment? The Tianjin City Housing Improvement Company is in the same business as them, but they also provide choices for the lower middle class. To be honest, we are a little better than the lower middle class, but we are still quite worse off than true middle-class families. It's not a matter of salary. It's just that we did not have the time to save up. Klein came to a realization as he put away the newspaper. Picking up his top hat, he stood up. Then, let's set off. I remember that the Tianjin City Housing Improvement Company is on Daffodil Street, Benson said as he opened the door. They are Improvement Association for the Working Class, known as 5%. Charities. Do you know why? The Tianjin Housing I don't know. Klein raised his cane and walked to Melissa's side. The girl with black hair that reached down her back nodded. Benson headed out and said, these kinds of housing improvement associations or companies were established as a result of Backlund. They are funded in 3 ways. 1. By requesting donations from charitable foundations. 2. Through funding proposals. They receive grants from the government's commission at a special rate of 4%. 3rd, through investments. By taking a portion of the rent received, they will give their investors 5% returns. That's why they are called 5%. Charities. The siblings went down the stairs and slowly walked toward Daffodil Street. They decided to confirm a place before talking to their present landlord, Mr. Frankie. They did not want to be in a situation where they were forced to move when they had no place to stay. I heard from Selina that there are housing improvement companies that are purely run as charities. Melissa asked in thought. Benson chuckled. There are, such as the Deweyville Trust, which Sir Deweyville donated money to establish. He builds apartments targeted for the working class. He also provides dedicated estate management personnel while only charging rather low rent. However, the criteria for applying is very strict. It sounds like you aren't fond of the idea. Klein acutely sensed it as he asked with a smile. No, I respect Sir Deweyville a lot, but I'm certain he does not know what true poverty is. Staying in his apartment is like a priest giving hope. It's not very pragmatic. For instance, tenants have to receive the main vaccines, and they have to take turns cleaning the bathroom. They are unable to sublease their apartments or use it for commercial activities. They aren't allowed to throw their rubbish wantonly, and children are prevented from playing in the corridors. Goddess, does he wish to make everyone ladies and gentlemen? Benson answered in his usual tone. Klein creased his brows in doubt. Doesn't sound problematic. Those are all very reasonable criteria. Yeah. Melissa nodded in agreement. Benson cocked his head and looked at them before chuckling. Perhaps I have protected both of you too well that you have not seen actual poverty. Do you think they would have the money for the main vaccines? The line for free charitable organization sets them back 3 months. Do you think their work is stable and not temporary? If they cannot sublet parts of their apartment to receive some extra income, Are they to move out when they lose their jobs? Besides, many ladies mend clothes or make matchboxes at home to maintain their livelihood. Those are included as commercial activities. Are you going to chase them all out? Most of the poor use all their efforts to survive. Do you think they have the time to discipline their children and stop them from running along the corridors? Perhaps they can only be locked at home until they're old enough, then sending them to places that accept child labor when they are around 7 or 8 years old. Ben did not use many adjectives to describe the matter. It caused Klein to shudder a little. This was how people from low socioeconomic classes lived? Beside him, Melissa fell into silence. It took a long while before she said in an ethereal tone, Jenny no longer wished for me to visit her after she moved to the lower street. Let's hope her father gets back on his feet after that injury and finds a stable job. However, I have seen too many alcoholics use alcohol to numb themselves. Benson laughed with a somber tone. Klein was at a loss for words. Melissa seemed to be the same. As such, the siblings walked silently down Daffodil Street and found Tianjin City Housing Improvement Company. The person who served them was a middle-aged man with an amiable smile. He did not wear a formal attire or a hat, but instead wore a white shirt and black vest. You can call me Scarter. Might I know what kind of house you have in mind? When he caught a glance at Klein's silver-inlaid cane, his smile widened. Klein looked at Benson, who was better with words, and gestured for him to answer. Benson directly answered, a terrace house. Scarter flipped through the files and documents in his hand before smiling. There are currently 5 that haven't been rented out. To be honest, we are geared more to serving customers, laborers, and their children who have housing difficulties where 6, 8, or even 10 or 12 people squeeze into a house. There aren't many terrace houses. There's one at 2 Daffodil Street, one in the North Borough, one in the East Borough. The weekly rent goes from 12 to 16 solely. You can take a look at the detailed introductions here. He handed over a document to Benson, Klein, and Melissa. After reading through it, the siblings exchanged looks and pointed to the same spot on the piece of paper simultaneously. Let's take a look at 2 Daffodil Street first, said Benson. Klein and Melissa nodded in response. This place was a district they were familiar with. Chapter 30, Brand New Beginning. 2, 4, and 6 Daffodil Street were terrace buildings with multifaceted hipped roofs. Their exteriors were painted grayish-blue, and 3 chimneys stood erected. The place obviously did not have lawns, gardens, or porches. The entrances directly faced the street. Tianjin City Housing Improvement Company Scarter took out a bunch of keys, and while opening the door, introduced, our terrace houses do not have foyers, so you enter directly into the living room. There's an oriel window facing Daffodil Street, so there's pretty good lighting. Klein, Benson, and Melissa were greeted by a fabric sofa bathing in the golden rays of the sun, and an area more spacious than their previous 2-bedroom apartment. This living room can be used as a guest hall. To its right is the dining room, and on the left is a fireplace that will keep you warm in winter. Scarter pointed around with great familiarity. Klein looked around and confirmed that it was a crude, open-style concept. The dining room and the living room were not separated by any partitions, but they were also far from the oriel window, making those spots rather dim. There was a rectangular red wooden table surrounded by 6 hardwood chairs with soft cushions. The fireplace on the left wall looked exactly like the ones in foreign movies and TV series that Klein used to watch. Behind the dining area is the kitchen, but we do not provide any appliances. Opposite to the living room is a small guest room and a bathroom. Scarter walked around and described the remaining layout of the house. The bathroom was separated into 2 parts. The outer area was where one would wash their face and brush their teeth, while the inner area was the toilet. There was an accordion door that separated them. The guest room was described to be small, but it was as big as the room that Melissa currently stayed in. She was stunned at the sight. After looking around the first floor, Scarter brought the 3 siblings to the stairway next to the bathroom. Down below is the underground cellar. It is quite stuffy downstairs, so you must remember to let some fresh air in first before entering. Benson nodded casually and followed Scarter to the second floor. On my left, there's a bathroom. On the same side, there are an additional 2 bedrooms. It's the same layout on my right, but the washroom on this side is next to the balcony. As he spoke, Scarter opened the bathroom door and stood sideways so that he would not obstruct Klein, Benson, and Melissa from looking in. The bathroom had an extra bathtub. Like the other bathroom, there was an accordion door next to the toilet. Although it was a little dusty, it wasn't dirty, smelly, or cramped. Melissa looked in a daze until Scarda walked to the bedroom next to it. Only then did she stop looking and follow the rest slowly. She took another few steps before looking back. Klein, who was experienced in life, was delighted and excited as well. Even though their landlord often supervised their cleaning up of the bathroom, it still was not clean enough. It was often nauseating, let alone the fact that they would easily encounter a line when they needed to relieve themselves. The other bathroom was similar. One of the 4 bedrooms was slightly bigger and was furnished with a bookcase. The rest were about the same size as each other and had a bed, table, and wardrobe. The balcony is very tiny, so you won't be able to dry too many clothes in the sun at a time. Scarda stood at the end of the corridor and pointed to a spot with a door and lock. There is a complete underground drainage, gas piping, meter, and other facilities. It is very suitable for you gentlemen and a lady like yourselves. It only requires 13 soldi of rent and 5 pence for use of the furniture weekly. In addition, there is a deposit that amounts to 4 weeks of rent. Without waiting for Benson to say a word, Klein looked around and asked curiously, roughly how much would it cost to buy the house? As a transmigrator from the Foodaholic Empire, the desire to buy property still existed within him. Upon hearing that question, Benson and Melissa were shocked. They looked at Klein as though they were seeing a monster. Scarda replied calmly and firmly, "Buy? No, we do not sell property. We only provide rental properties. I'm just trying to have a general sense of the prices." Klein explained awkwardly. Scarda hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "Last month, the owner of 11 Daffodil Street sold a limited-period land deed with a similar property sitting atop the land. £300 for 15 years. It is much cheaper than renting directly, but not everyone can fork out such a large sum of money. If one would like to buy it over completely, the owner's posted price is £850. £850? Klein quickly made the mental calculations. My weekly pay is £3. Benson earns £1 and 10 soldi. Rent is 13 soldi, and if we eat well every day, we would spend nearly £2 a week. On top of that, there are expenses such as clothes, transportation, social expenditures, so on and so forth. We can only save less than 20 soldi a week. 1 year adds up to about £35. £850 would require more than 20 years. Even if we bought the land for a limited period of time for £300, it would take us at least 8 or 9 years. That doesn't living independently, raising children, traveling, and so on, include getting married. In a world without individual housing loans, most people are likely to opt for rental. Realizing this, he stepped back and stole a glance at Benson. He beckoned him to talk to Scarda about the rent. As for Melissa's intentions, they were obvious from her bright eyes. At that moment, Klein suddenly thought of letting Benson loose. Benson tapped his playing cane and looked around before he said, "We should take a look at other houses. The dining area's lighting isn't good, and the balcony is very small. Look, only that bedroom has a fireplace, and the furniture is too old. If we move in, we have to at least change half of these." He pointed out faults in a hurried tone, spending 10 minutes to persuade Scarda to lower the rent to 12 soldi and the furniture usage fee to 3 pence, while rounding up the deposit to £2. Without further ado, the siblings returned with Scarda to the Tianjin City Housing Improvement Company and signed 2 copies of the contract. They then headed over to the notary office of Tianjin City to notarize the contract. After paying the deposit and first week's rent, Klein and Benson's remaining money added up to £9, 2 soldi, and 8 pence. Standing before the door of 2 Daffodil Street, they each held a bunch of copper keys. They were momentarily unable to look away, their emotions churning within them. It feels like a dream. After a while, Melissa lifted her head to look at the future Moretti residence, and she spoke with a low yet unsteady voice. Benson let out a breath and smiled. "Then don't wake up." Klein wasn't as emotional as they were. He nodded and said, "We need to change the locks of the main door and balcony door as soon as possible. There's no hurry. The reputation of Tianjin City Housing Improvement Company is very good. The rest of the money is for your formal suit. However, before that, we need to pay Mr. Frankie a visit." Benson pointed in the direction of the apartment. The siblings made do with rye bread at home before heading for a terrace apartment on Iron Cross Street. When they knocked on their landlord's door, Mr. Frankie declared imposingly while his short frame perched on a sofa, "You know my rules. No one is allowed to be behind their rent." Benson leaned forward and smiled. "Mr. Frankie, we are here to give up our lease." That straightforward? Would negotiating this way work? Standing beside Benson, Klein was shocked when he heard him. On the way here, Benson had said that his bottom line was a compensation of 12 solely. Give up your lease? No. We have a contract, and there's still half a year left. Frankie glared at Benson as he flailed his arms. Benson looked at him seriously and waited for a moment before saying calmly, "Mr. Frankie, you should understand that you could have made much more money." "Make much more?" Frankie asked with interest, touching his skinny face. Benson sat up straight and explained with a smile. "The two-bedroom unit was rented to the three of us for 5 solely and 6 pence. But if you were to rent it to a family of 5 or 6 people, with 2 or 3 of them working and getting paid, I think they would be willing to pay more to stay there instead of staying at Lower Street where it's ridden with crime. I think 5 solely 10 pence or 6 solely would be a reasonable price." Frankie's eyes brightened up and his throat moved as Benson continued to say, "Besides, you are certainly aware that rental prices have been increasing in recent years. The longer we stay, the greater a loss you incur. But I need time to look for a new tenant." Mr. Frankie, who had inherited the apartment building, obviously liked the idea. "I believe you can find one very quickly since you have the ability and resources to do so. Maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days. We will pay for the losses you incurred during this time. How about the deposit of 3 solely that we have paid? It is very reasonable." Benson immediately decided for Frankie. Frankie nodded in satisfaction. "Benson, you are such a conscientious and honest young man. All right then, let's sign the termination of contract." Klein was dumbfounded watching this happen. He completely understood how easy it was to convince Mr. Frankie. That's way too easy. With the problem of the previous contract resolved, the 3 siblings first helped Klein buy his formal wear and then got busy with moving house. They didn't have anything heavy or bulky, as bulkier items belonged to the landlord. Thus, Benson and Melissa rejected Klein's idea of hiring a carriage and instead carried their things themselves. They went back and forth between Daffodil Street and Iron Cross Street. The hot sun outside the window set in the west, and golden rays shone through the oriel window, scattering across the desk's surface. Klein looked at the rack that had books and notebooks arranged neatly before putting an ink bottle and a fountain pen on the table, which he had wiped earlier. "It's finally over." He let out a breath of relief and heard his stomach growl. He loosened his rolled-up sleeves as he walked towards the door. He had a bed that belonged to him. The bedsheet and blanket were white, old but clean. Klein twisted the doorknob and walked out of his bedroom. Just as he was preparing to say something, he saw both doors on the opposite side open simultaneously as Benson and Melissa came into his view. Looking at the dust and dirt marks on their faces, Klein and Benson suddenly burst out into laughter, sounding abnormally cheerful. Melissa bit her lips lightly, but the laughter was contagious. She eventually let out a soft laugh. The next morning, Klein stood before a full-length mirror with no cracks, seriously smoothing out his collar and sleeves of his shirt. The outfit included a white shirt, black tuxedo, silk top hat, black vest, a set of trousers, boots, and a bow tie. He felt the pinch of paying £8 in total. However, the effect was great. Klein felt that his reflection in the mirror exhibited greater scholarly qualities and made him look more handsome. Click. He closed his pocket watch and put it into his inner pocket. He then took his cane and hid his revolver. He took the track public carriage and arrived at Zutland Street. The moment he entered the Blackthorn Security Company, he realized that he was so used to his previous lifestyle that he had forgotten to give Melissa extra money, but allowed her to walk to school instead. Shaking his head, he took note of it before stepping into Blackthorn Security Company. He saw the brown-haired girl, Roseanne, making coffee. A rich aroma permeated throughout the office. "Good morning, Klein. The weather is great today," Roseanne greeted him with a smile. "To be frank, I have always been curious. In such weather, don't you men feel hot wearing those formal suits? I know for a fact that Tingin's summer isn't as hot as the South's, but it is still summer." "It's the price of style," Klein replied humorously. "Good morning, Miss Roseanne." Where's the captain? Same old place. Roseanne pointed inside. Klein nodded. He went through the partition and knocked on Dunn Smith's office door. Come in. Dunn's voice was deep and gentle as usual. When he saw Klein, who looked quite different in a set of nice formal wear, he nodded and his gray eyes smiled. Have you decided? He asked. Klein took a deep breath and answered seriously. Yes, I have made a decision. Dunn slowly sat up straight. His expression became solemn, but the deep recesses of his gray eyes remained the same. Tell me your answer. Klein replied without hesitation. Seer.